Hello, my name is Amita Sehgal. I am the Principal Animation Lecturer at Majors Institute of Excellence, Singapore. This is a tutorial of a body mechanics exercise. For today's tutorial, we're going to use this video clip as a reference. It's a man jumping from a height. It's a simple enough movement, but it's a great example of body mechanics. So, first thing we do is watch the clip a few times, make good observations about what exactly is happening in there, and then closely analyze the reference. Okay, so we are going to start with identifying the storytelling poses in the reference. The storytelling poses are the broad actions in the reference. So we see that he is shifting his body weight to the left. He puts that foot down firmly, the body comes over it, so it shifts to the left. Then he bends down into the crouched pose, stretches fully before leaping off, reaches a certain height, stretches over to the other side, makes contact, crouches down again, rises up, rotates towards the camera, and takes a step. Okay, we're going to identify the storytelling poses first. Your very first frame becomes your first storytelling pose. In QuickTime, you can change the time code to frame numbers, so that can give you a count. Another tool that I really like to use while I'm analyzing the reference is Epic Pen. Epic Pen is free to use, and it helps you just draw over your reference, so you actually have a tool to judge what is happening between one pose and another. So we're going to just draw simple lines around the pose, just to see how much change happens between one pose and another. Okay, so that's your first pose, which will be your very first storytelling pose. That's frame 0. After that, in the storytelling poses, what happens is that he crouches down. So the extreme of the crouch happens at frame 22, which becomes your next storytelling pose. So again, you can just draw a very rough outline of the pose. Okay, so this is the next storytelling pose, which is frame 22. After the crouch, we know that there is a stretch. Since we already know what are the main components of our animation, the stretch happens around frame, it's at frame 33 is the maximum stretch, which is the last frame of contact with the platform before he leaps off. Okay, so you know what is height. Okay, so that's frame 33. After that, we know the next storytelling pose is going to be the maximum height that he reaches in the jump. That happens to be frame 36. So this is the maximum height that he reaches. He has a certain incline to his body. There is a certain tilt to the body, which you should take note of, because that tilt will reverse when he comes to the other side of the jump. So frame 36 is the extreme of the height. Then there is the stretch on the other side before he makes contact with the ground, which is frame 45. Here is again the tilt that we were talking about. So the tilt sort of reverses at frame 45. Okay, he makes contact, and there's the crouch again, which is your follow through, which is at frame 55. Okay, please note that we are only looking at the spine and the movement of the main control so far. We haven't really traced the hands as yet, but we can always do that as a separate pass. Okay, frame 55. After the crouch, we know that he stands up and turns around, which is frame before he takes the step. So that's probably the height that he reaches, and then he moves ahead for a step, so maybe around frame 72. Okay, so frame 72. And then he takes a step, so which is your last frame. Okay, I'm using just yellow for all of this, and it can get a little confusing, so if you want, you can color code your frames as well, which would probably be a good thing to do. I tend to keep one color for the storytelling poses and another one for my key poses in between. Okay, so you have a rough idea of what the movement is like. These become your storytelling poses. Now, between the storytelling poses, you can figure what is happening to break down the movement, because if frame 0 is one pose of yours and frame 22 is the other pose, then in between you're not really getting much definition. It'll just be a swimmy movement from standing to crouching, which is not exactly what is happening in the reference. So if you look closer, between your storytelling poses, you can define your key poses, which is the next step. So between 0 and 22, the big things that happen is that he actually puts his foot down and the body weight shifts to the left side. He bends down, but it's not a rotation of the spine and a translation of the body down at the same time. He actually rotates his spine down in the first half much more, and then travels down in the second half of that movement further. So we're going to take a note of the key poses now between the first and the second storytelling pose. So the weight shift kind of happens in the first 4 or 5 frames. He is starting to rotate a little, but that's very slight rotation, less than almost 5% rotation, but it is where the weight shift to the left is happening. So he places his foot down flat, and then there is a weight shift before he truly starts rotating down. So I would say around 5 is your key pose. He then starts rotating the spine down before he actually makes a big movement down with the translation of the body, where the spine is almost fully rotated. So we make that distinction somewhere around frame 13, because till then it's mostly spine and very little actual translation down. So it's more rotation than translation, and then from 13 to 22 it's the opposite. It's more translation and very little rotation. Okay, so now we're kind of defined between frame 0 and frame 22. The other thing to note is that he is not translating straight down. He's actually doing like he's actually doing a little curve while coming down. So make a note of that, and you can include that information in your key pose at frame 13. So at frame 13, the body shifts back slightly before coming down and then moving in an arc forward. Okay, let's see what's happening between 22 and 33. So 22 and 33 actually seem quite straightforward, except for the fact that there is an arc in the body. So instead of keeping it a linear movement from the crouching to the stretched position, like we were talking about, we just keep like a slight arc in the body when he comes forward. Okay. So we're not going to add anything much between 22 and 33 for now. Between 33 and 36, that's only 3 frames apart. You don't really need to finesse any of that. What's happening between, let's see what's happening between frame 36 and 45. Now, between 36 and 45, it's I think it's mainly the hands, but as far as the body goes, you're okay. Okay, between 45 and 55 is when the body comes down and then rotates. So again, over here, it's we see that that's not happening at the same time, the rotation and the translation. The body actually translates while still keeping the tilt favoring the rotation at frame 45, and then from somewhere around say around frame 48, 49, there is more rotation. Also, if we look at the main hip area, he comes down, which is a continuation of the trajectory of the jump. So the same arc continues, he comes down, and then there is a slight shift backwards till about frame 55. So you can probably identify frame 48 as a key pose in between the two storytelling poses. Okay. So frame 48 becomes another storytelling pose. After that, you have frame 55, and then he stands up and rotates towards us at 72. Between 55 and 72, we have him standing up and then doing the rotation towards the camera. So you can kind of divide that movement in between, which is when he's standing up before he actually starts rotating. So that comes somewhere around frame 64, 65, before he actually starts rotating towards the camera. So you can define that as well. Okay, so that's frame 65. Okay, then you have frame 72 and frame 79. So we're not going to define anything between these two. So this completes the listing and identifying of all your poses. So once you have defined exactly what is going into your animation, it's actually a really simple, straightforward process to put that in Maya. When you talk about the time distribution between planning and actual execution of an animation, it should be 80-20. You spend 80% of your time analyzing the reference, planning, figuring out exactly what you are going to do when you actually open Maya and put your key poses down. So you should have a very clear idea. Do not open Maya and then try and figure out what your animation is going to be like. You should have a very clear plan of exactly what it is that you hope to do. Okay, so let's start animating. I'm going to be using the Malcolm rig. Malcolm is a free rig that's available online from Anim School. So I've referenced in the Malcolm rig, and I've just created two surfaces, one which is going to be the road, and the other one is going to be the platform at the back of the truck. We're going to set the timeline, which is, since we know our keys from 0 to 79 frames, so now I know that this is my workspace. Okay, the Malcolm rig from Anim School comes with an Anim School picker, which is extremely handy for using the rig. So you can go ahead and include that. It's an easy enough setup. Okay, so we're going to start with basic posing. I'm going to put down on all the storytelling poses. One of the things that I can do to use the reference even more efficiently is to pull it in as an image plane. So here I have as the image plane, so you can just import a movie and you can bring in the reference movie. I've already done that in the side view, so here is my image plane and I can use that as a very clear reference. So you can okay, so the character, I'm just going to give him an easy starting pose. So he's got a slight bend in his feet. I'm not going to use the side view only, because I want to give it a natural enough pose, and you have to be able to look at it from all camera angles. One thing that you want to do in your posing, no matter what sort of a file you're using, is to give it a natural pose and take it off the 0, 0 axis. So here, when we're starting the animation, we know that his weight is actually on his right foot, because in the next couple of frames it actually changes from the right to the left foot. So I'm going to favor the weight on the right foot. I'm not going to complicate the pose too much. I'm using IK hands, so you want to shift from FK to IK and just keep it by his side. Give him a very natural wrist rotation, and do the same for the other hand. Okay, I'm going to give him a slight bend. Okay, so you can keep detailing this down to the fingers, but I would suggest to approach it simply. So start off with a very basic pose, giving it only the information that you need. When adjusting the spine, it's good to actually select all controls of the spine and rotate them together. That gives you a more natural feel. So for now, this much is enough. Sorry, this foot is actually off the ground a little, so I'm just going to do that as well. Just give it a slight rotation. It's also Okay, so I have somewhere to go for that. Alright, so this is good enough. Maybe just bend the other arm a little. That's fine, not really being seen. Okay, so this is good enough for my starting pose. I'm just going to select only the body controls, or the basic controls is enough. Let me see, basic controls is enough, and I'm just going to save a key at frame 0. So I know that the next pose that I need to do is at frame 22. 5 and 13 are my key poses, so I can either go straight from one storytelling pose to another and then fill in the key poses in between, or I can go linearly. I am going to choose to go straight to the next key pose, which is at frame 22. At frame 22, he's crouching down, so the weight is almost equally on both feet. I'm gonna plant this foot down and straighten it, so remove any sort of rotation that's on it. Get the body down over the legs, but make sure that they're both feet. It's always important to note where the center of gravity is. The center of gravity is the line that runs through the weight bearing area. So as of right now, the center of gravity would be a line that runs right through this part of the body, and so you just have to make sure that the poses that are being held are in balance, so the weight is properly distributed between either side. Give the tilt of the body the main control before shaping the spine to avoid any sort of complications with the spine control later on. Another thing, when you're using a reference, suppose the reference is short in such a manner that doesn't give you much indication about both sides of the body, so you can actually see only one side really clearly, and then it looks like the other side is perfectly mirroring it. Use creative license and take it, give it a slight offset so it's not an exact mirror on both sides of the body. Symmetry in animation is really not very appealing, so it's better if you just move things around a little so that you can see both sides of the body and they're not simply overlapping. I'm not going to detail the fingers just yet. I'm just going to put down the basic body poses first and then bother about the smaller parts. Okay, so I can see a little bit of the other hand and the other leg, so I know that it's not perfectly being mirrored. This is good enough for the pose at 22, just to make sure that I have keyed. Maybe I can take the body a little further back, just to make sure that I haven't missed any controls. I'm just going to select the basic controls again and just save a key for all of them. Frame 33 is the stretch pose. We have the squash pose at frame 22, which works like an anticipation for the body before it leaps off the floor. Stretch pose at frame 33. It's good to keep a little bit of bend at the toes just to show the pressure being exerted while the push off is happening. You can exaggerate this pose a little. You don't have to stick exactly to the reference. So I'm gonna actually stretch him out a little more. Okay, so that's the squash and the stretch. I'm just trying to see how much difference is there in the shape of the spine, so you can definitely open up the spine a little more. Still looking down towards the floor. Be careful not to give too much neck movement to a character like Malcolm, because he has far longer neck than the normal human proportion. Don't let the elbows come in too close to the actual joint. There's always a danger of a pop and a snap because it doesn't know how to adjust. It doesn't adjust smoothly when it gets too close to the actual joint. Again, for the sake of asymmetry, let's just separate out the arms so we can see both of them, and it's not like one is perfectly overlapping the other. Okay, so kind of got the stretch pose. I'm gonna set in the next couple of keys really quickly, which is 36. It's where the peak. Again, I'm just going to give a little bit of an offset to the feet so that they don't look like exact mirrored copies, not perfectly symmetrical. shoulders rise up a little, hands come out. The next pose is at frame 45. That is the maximum stretch pose on the other side. I need to see how much the main body is moving, because it has to be an arc. I can trace how much of an arc there is in the reference, either using a marker pen on the screen or using the Epic pen, and to trace the movement of my character, I can use the motion trails up here, which is a very handy tool to see the trajectory of the movement. And so I would strongly recommend using that from time to time. So this character has exceptionally long legs, so I'm just going to push all of this down to give him a little more space. Again, you can exaggerate the pose slightly. So sometimes I find it's best to just reset things back to zero, because they could just get a little too complicated. So the elbows are actually pointing inwards now. Okay, so that's your frame 45. Of course, we have to fix the hands in between. Okay, so it's a rough 55. The next pose after that is 64, where he stands up. At each one of these poses, the one thing you need to really look out for is the center of gravity, is the balance, whether the poses are in proper balance. Now, of course, there are quite a few poses that aren't actually in balance, even in in the reference, so they're not really meant to be in balance. That is when, for example, the character is in mid-step. Now, of course, if he was to suddenly stop in that position, it's not that he would actually be able to hold the pose, he would fall over. So it's not that you have to find a perfect balance in each one of them, but the ones that are going to be held definitely need to have a balance. Okay, 72 is when he starts to move around. Let's just see what is actually happening at 72. It's turning around and taking a step. So it's turning around and taking a step. Okay, so I'm gonna so if he's taking a step, we can presume that we know that his weight is on the right foot, because the left foot is just about making contact. So it's just a small step that he's taking to the side. Give him a little more of a twirl, or maybe let's just give him a rotation, because the foot is off the ground. As a rule, if the foot is off the ground, you're probably better off giving a toe roll instead of a toe rotation instead of a foot rotation instead of Okay, so I've gone ahead and added the very last pose, which is at frame 79, and I have put in the key poses at 5, 13, 48 and 65 as we had planned. So it's a pretty straightforward, clean animation. It seems to be working well with just these many key poses. The main thing to look at in an animation like this is the change in pace. So he has a hang time, he comes down really quickly, and there's a big follow through. The hands are definitely moving in very clean arcs, which you should use motion trail for, and track and smoothen as much as you possibly can. And at every key pose, make sure that you know where the weight is. That is one important question that you should ask yourself whenever you are animating any character, is you always should know where exactly is the weight. Is it favoring one foot over the other? See what the relationship of the main control to the feet is, and how that changes from pose to pose. I hope this tutorial has helped, and you can definitely explore the same working method for any animation that you are using a video reference for. Thank you and all the best.